Hey everyone, Sawmill Charlie. This is part 2 of a series of videos that we're going to talk about single hive brood chamber management. I did get a question on the last video whether or not you could use deeps in this method, and yes you can, and most likely most beekeepers will be using deeps as the single hive brood chamber. I just chose to use mediums because that's what I use in my apiary, where I have all the same size boxes and the same size frames, which are all interchangeable, whether they're in the brood chamber or in the honey supers. I would like to recap in what we talked about in the last video about single hive brood chamber management. As you see, I have my 3 medium boxes here. These are demonstration hives, of course. And this is the way I go through the winter. And most likely you will probably go through the winter with maybe 2 deeps if you're using deep boxes. Now in the springtime, as most people know, the bees are going to move up through the winter. The bottom box is going to be empty. The 2 medium boxes here are going to be filled with brood and food. And on the deep box, the brood would be in the bottom through the winter time, and as winter passes, they would move up into the top box. Now in the springtime, for here in Maryland, approximately at the end of March, I am going to take off the bottom box, which is empty, take the 2 top boxes and put them down onto my bottom board, and this will be my single brood chamber for the honey seasons, which here in Maryland starts between April and goes until the end of June. On a person who's using the deep boxes, the brood is going to be up in the deep box, the bottom box is going to be completely empty, and you would take this box out of your hive stand stack and put your top box with all the brood and all the bees down on the bottom board. Okay, here we have the 2 different styles of hives. I've removed 1 box from each hive stack. Now we only have a 1 deep box for our single brood chamber if you're using deep boxes. If you're using mediums, I am going to have 2 medium boxes. At this time, I'll put the queen excluder on, and then on above that, of course, I'll be putting the honey super on, which I have right here. And here is my honey super. So I would like to explain, I'll say, the mechanics of what is happening in this brood chamber, as since you've reduced the actual space of the brood chamber. First, you've got all your bees in here, you've got all your brood in here, you've got maybe a little bit of food. Like on the mediums here, I normally put a frame of food on either side of each box. You could also do that for the same as your 10 frame brood box. Put your food here on either side and all your open brood and open comb in the middle, along with all the bees and of course the queen. What is happening is this: your queen is laying up all this open comb and putting their eggs in there, and that is basically forcing the forage force of bees that are coming in, bringing nectar into this hive, and they must go upstairs, as I call it, through the queen excluder into your honey super to store the nectar that's coming in through the hive. They can't put any nectar down here except for maybe a little bit for, accessible use right away, because it's filled up with eggs and larvae and capped brood. So I've found over the last year, by using this method, this honey box up here, if it's drawn out, they will fill it completely from wall to wall, all 9 or 10 frames, depending on what amount of frames that you're using. And it fills relatively evenly. Each frame weighs, after they cap, pretty much the same. Now, when I get up to about 80% full of nectar, and that's not being capped for you new beekeepers, then I under super, meaning that I take this box off, I put an empty super on, and I put this box back on up top. That way the super is ready, available, being open for them the forager bees to store the honey in there. Now, as you go on through the summertime, you just keep stacking boxes. The downside of single brood chamber management is that every 7 to 10 days, you have to go into this brood chamber and check on the amount of capped brood frames that are in this area. Same thing with the deep boxes, of course. The only downside between mediums and deeps is I've got 20 frames to deal with here, and I have only 10 frames here, which is a little bit easier to manage. So when you go into this brood chamber area, in this situation, in this box here with 2 mediums, I might have approximately 6 frames of capped brood because of 20 frames. In the deep, you might have, let's say, 4 frames of capped brood. And then the rest are going to be eggs and larvae, and maybe a little bit of nectar and some pollen in both of the boxes in that brood area. So when we have, let's say, 6 frames of capped brood in this box here, when we inspect it, I have found that you need to remove half of it, and you remove it with the bees on the frames. I also try to isolate the queen, making sure where she is at, either in a queen clip or she's on a frame. Let's say I'll sit her next to one of these side walls where I know where she's at while I'm removing these frames of capped brood. Same thing here in the deep. If, let's say, you have the 4 frames of capped brood, you want to remove at least 2 of them out of this hive. Now, what are you going to do with all this capped brood? If you have, let's say, 10 honey hives and you have a couple of them that are light or weak in bees and they need a boost, then take these 4 frames out of, let's say, 3 to 4 frames out of here, or the 2 frames out of your deep, and put them in that weak hive. And along with the bees, they won't fight, and that will boost that hive up so it can be equalized, as I call it, in all your hives. They all have basically the same amount of bee power, as I call it, where they can gather honey. They're not overly populated and all that. And that also brings into the concern of swarming. If you don't take the brood out of here and they get bigger and bigger and bigger, she's going to run out of room to lay, because when you do take the brood out, you, of course, you're going to put in empty combs back in so she'll have a place to lay. But if you, like I said, if you don't, they're going to run out of room, and she is going to make swarm cells, and they're going to swarm. This technique of equalizing your hives is a great technique to prevent swarming, and it just works wonderfully, as I found out last year. And it also keeps all your hives basically at the same strength, and they will all produce a lot more honey. Now, something else that I have noticed this year is that my best hives that are bringing in the most amount of honey, with the most amount of honey supers on them, is when you find the population of bees in your honey super very, very strong, where the bees are filling up the box and possibly a good portion of bees on top of the frames. That hive is a very strong hive. Now, if you go into a hive where there's a small amount of bees up in the honey super, let's say the first honey super that you're looking at, that hive is on the weak side. You need to add brood to that hive. And you shouldn't have to take any brood away from that hive. So it's a balancing game. Does it have enough bees in the box in order to take brood out of the box? So I look at it, if the bees are sort of like overflowing where you can't see the tops of the frames when you're pulling off the honey supers, and there's bees up in the honey supers just as much as there is down here, then that's a good strong hive. If there's not that many, only half full up here, then I would not take any brood out of this box here. I would actually add some. So that's the balancing act that you have to kind of learn yourself. And so until next time, please like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell, and share with your friends, and have fun with your bees.